Good morning. It's my honor and privilege to welcome a veteran of the corporate world, of the business world, to this BW Dialogue. Today, we are talking to the CFO of Sify Technologies, Mr. MP Vijay Kumar. He doesn't really need an introduction, but he's someone who did his chartered accountancy, ran a successful practice, and now for many, many years leads Sify Technologies as part of the senior leadership team. So let me start by asking Mr. MP Vijay Kumar. Mr. MP Vijay Kumar, the last 17 months have been unusual. How have they been for you both personally and professionally?
Thank you, Dr. Anurag Batra, for the invite. Pleasure interacting with you. The last 17 months certainly has been a learning curve, especially because it was the first time everybody was at home and everybody was working from home. So the challenges were unique, in particular keeping employees' morale high and engaged. Our services were essential services for clients, and people had to risk life maintaining network on the ground and keeping the data center lights and applications on. Grateful to our colleagues for the responsiveness they have shown to the change. On the professional front, the challenges were more external than internal, for the reason which I just articulated, being there on the ground. While it did create demand for our product and services, the operating landscape was quite diverse. Some of our clients were at the beginning of the information technology induction, some mature and others at refresh end. So ensuring the same set of products and services met this diverse kind of client profile was a different challenge. On the personal front, no complaints per se, except that the uncertainty of when things would come back to normal was a bit disturbing, as meeting people, even those who required in-person support, was not possible.
Yeah, we totally understand that. It's been a mixed bag. But let me now move on to, you're the CFO of Sify Technology. And today, CFOs play a larger role in running of a company. How do you think the role of CFO has changed in the last 17 months? And how have the policy leaders in the world of auditing adopted to the changes? For example, we are doing virtual audits, we are doing virtual board meetings. Correct. And how has the focus from compliance shifted to growth?
I'm a strong believer that every crisis presents an opportunity, and one should never waste that opportunity. It is during these times that you actually get an opportunity of looking more deeply inside the organization. My view is that CFO should use this spotlight to revisit the internal processes and the customer delivery models and ingrain this as part of the organization DNA forever. We shouldn't do it for the limited period of this pandemic impact. Instead, we should ingrain it within the organization DNA. What you observed on auditing, board meetings being held virtual is a true issue on the ground. But my experience, also fairly deeply connected with the accounting fraternity, is that the profession has actually scaled to adapt to this change in terms of doing audits remotely and also ensure compliance at the same time. But having said that, I still believe that when you do audit at a client's place, the ability to form judgments is a little better. Hopefully, we'll get back there.
Okay. Now, I keep saying the CFO is the Chief Future Officer, and future is all about growth. Compliance is essential. It's like the base on which you grow. But tell us, how are CFOs? A lot of CFOs are becoming CEOs. Whether you look at TCS, look at Mahindra, You look at globally, Indra Nui was a CFO before she became the CEO. So, how do you think CFOs are contributing to the growth of the company?
I have always been a strong believer that if there is one function within an organization which gives you a 360-degree view of every function within the company and of the business, it is that of the finance function. And more so when you are a CFO who is grounded and well connected in the peer group within your organization, your ability to gain the respect of the peer community and thereafter give leadership to the peer community within the organization, you are very uniquely positioned. And Dr. Batra, you would recall, at least when I started my career, for us, Hindustan Lever, Nestle were all iconic organizations where most of the young finance professionals would like to join those organizations because they developed so much of managerial talent that at one point of time, if you recall, Dr. Batra, in 90s and all, almost all the large organizations, you'd actually get senior leadership and CEOs from the finance background. And I see that trend only increasing. And there are many more examples on the ground, including in the MSME segment.
Thank you so much. Now, one of the advantages of the last 7 months of COVID has been the huge digital acceleration that has happened. What would have possibly happened in years has happened in months. Now, how is SIFI leveraging this to grow and to transform both itself and its customers?
No, you actually said it so nicely, Dr. Batra, that what people would have done it over years, they have started thinking of doing it in months. But the most important thing is, which I am seeing, contrast with my last 14 years of experience, including engaging with our own clientele, is that there is a very high level of executive sponsorship. So typically executive sponsorships used to be in terms of approving a project or just looking at it at a 30,000 feet. But now I'm seeing in all the client organizations, the executive sponsorship where they are involved very deeply in terms of how the digitalization can help transform their business. And for us, particularly in areas of cloud adoption, security in the cloud, and edge connectivity, these have been big gainers. And undeniably, data will be consistently a growing component, and hence the demand for cloud, network, and the associated services will only keep growing exponentially for a foreseeable future. And I believe that as an organization, given our nimbleness and more importantly, our ability to be innovative, I think we are well positioned to leverage the opportunities ahead.
Mr. MP Vijay Kumar, again, with digital acceleration and growth comes challenges of security and the confidentiality of the data. And while there are compliance norms, there are practical issues that come up. Tell me, how do you see security of data as being the differentiator when it comes to choosing enterprise partners and so on and so forth?
Absolutely right, Dr. Batra. In fact, I'll give a very simple corollary. Unlike in the past, where data used to be kept on-premise within the organization, people are now looking at keeping it at the cloud, at the data centers. It is something equivalent to having cash at your home in your safe, the security, versus keeping cash at the bank. So people would start keeping money in the bank if they believe that the bank will not collapse, the cash is safe at the bank. So those security concerns are there when you're looking at cash. There's exactly similar concerns when it comes to data as well. When it comes to data, there are 3 levels of security. One is the transport layer. Data is moving from place A, where it is getting originated, to the place where the application is hosted. Second is security at the place where the application is hosted. And lastly, the security within the application itself. And in this context, it's very important that the customer should have a very high level of confidence that there will be no breach of security at any of the three layers. And organizations with whom I interact, all of them are very, very conscious of this IT security, except that there is a little bit of hesitancy to spend. Many are looking at deferring it or spending it over a period of time. But my 2 cents to them is, when it comes to data security, we need to see it as essential cost, because any breach, the loss arising out of it is far, far higher than the cost which you incur. While it may appear that a breach is not highly likely and it's less likely, but we just don't know. In 1,000 iteration, whether it will be the third occasion it will fail or the 995th occasion it would fail. So it's better to see it as an essential cost and invest it. The good thing is many IT organizations like us provide even security as a service, which means organizations need not invest the money upfront. They could rather consume it as a service over a period of time.
Absolutely. Now let me focus on another area which impacts what you do, the business world, and the future of work, which is this movement to work from anywhere. I mean, today you're in Noida while you're based in Chennai and we are doing this interview. So you can work from anywhere, from home, from a cyber cafe, from a hotel lobby. So clearly, this work from home was thrust upon us, but there are some advantages in it and there are some disadvantages in it. Now, do you see a situation where the future is a remote, or is it hybrid, or do you see we'll be back fully at office spaces when pandemic is over? What's your sense?
I don't think we'll be 100% back at office. I certainly would not advocate that. In fact, even in the early 2010s, I used to drive within my organization a model where we can actually have part of the people working out of home, for the simple reason that some economic sense as well. There are a lot of women in particular in India, fairly well educated, and for family reasons, in their 30s, they tend to be at home. They're all exceptionally good talent, and I've always believed that that's a huge amount of talented pool, which organizations are actually not using. If you could actually enable work from home, you could get both good talent as well as at low cost. So I've actually been a champion of that for quite some time. And I'm so happy that this pandemic, in a sense, has made people to believe that work from anywhere is possible. So my view, it would be largely a hybrid where people would work from anywhere and you can access the best of the talent from anywhere. It will also help you manage your employee cost as well better. For example, you could access talent in tier 2, tier 3 cities as well for exactly the same job which you do, where their cost of living is pretty low. And you also manage your SG&A better. So I would largely tilt towards and work towards ensuring that we have a hybrid model. I'm not saying fully work from anywhere model for a reason, Dr. Batra, that I believe that when you actually interface in person, there is a culture which you build and an energy transfer which happens. Knowingly or unknowingly, when you are within a group of 5 people, 10 people in person, there's an energy which you transfer. You miss that when you are actually working remotely. And remotely also, I keep advocating this to all. People get on a video call, but keep their videos off. I would strongly encourage people to have their videos on, because there's so much of communication which happens through the eyes, the body language. It's important you communicate that way as well as receive the communication that way. So with some adoption like this, I would strongly believe hybrid is the way to go.
Thank you so much. I think you rightly said there are advantages that we have discovered, both in terms of the cost and most importantly in terms of the productivity. Of course, it requires some reconfiguration at home because, but I think by now most of us have adjusted to it. Now, another positive aspect of COVID-induced transformation has been this movement to digital health, digital education, digital commerce, right? At least digital entertainment, which means that we have become what I call millennials in the way we behave. Even if we are not teenagers, but we are screenagers. We do everything looking at a screen, right? So clearly, there is something that has improved for future in terms of consultations on digital health, digital education. Though I still believe that the on-campus experience cannot be replaced by technological tools of teaching. What is your view about each of these areas? Whether we talk of digital health, we talk of digital education, and digital entertainment.
No, as far as health and entertainment, I think they're pretty positive. And on education, I'd just like to borrow what you expressed, Dr. Batra. For higher education, I'm a strong believer that digital education is good because you get access to knowledge from across the world. But when it comes to primary education, secondary education, and even up to UG level, there's so much of learning which happens beyond textbooks and the screen. When kids who are 10 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, or even those pursuing UG, who are 19, 20-year-old people, when they are at the campus, the learnings which they get from campus is substantially high. I'm very, very sympathetic to all the children. My view, they are the most affected in the pandemic. They have lost almost 2 years of learning. It is important that a good part of learning happens at the campus, as you mentioned. We as a society will have a full generation of kids who have lost precious learning of 2 years. For me, this is a bit scary, but by nature, I'm an optimist and hope we will catch up. Just look at the bottom layer of the society, Dr. Batra. I come from one such very low middle class background. It is scary to imagine the pain of those children from economically weaker sections with no access to smart devices, connectivity, etc. For these children in the lower strata of society, the only way to transform lives is education. And they are missing these 2 precious years. It disturbs me quite a bit, but I hope we catch up some way in the near future.
Since you talked about this aspect, let me talk to you about another disturbing aspect. This is of the loss of livelihoods to people at the lower strata of the society. Again, in China, the pent-up demand is back. US is showing similar numbers. At least for now in India, seems like some part of the demand is back. But we went through a huge livelihood crisis and loss, and lots of workers were displaced. Now, what is your forecast in terms of how do you think India will recover? Of course, we don't know when or whether the third wave of corona will come. But what is your assessment basis where we are today on August 5th?
It's a tough one to predict, Dr. Batra. If you had asked me last July 2020, to be very honest, we never thought that a second wave could come and it could be so harsh on us. Nevertheless, let me take a little bit of risk in predicting. The India recovery is based on multiple factors, and more importantly, what will be the likely impact or scale and magnitude of the third wave and its mutations. The positive things first is that agriculture seems to be doing well, and there is liquidity in the whole system. And supply side, I think the central bank has done a phenomenal job in the last 17 months. I'm not attempting to quote statistics since they're all over in the public domain. I interact fairly with a cross section of the society, including the smaller, medium units and all. The concern is an increasing high probability of a K-shaped recovery, wherein the rich and middle class might see gains, but the poor might become poorer. The big danger of a K-shaped recovery, and I recall the former RBI Governor Dr. Duveri Subbarao speak about is, it has a tendency of widening the inequality. And once inequality widens, anti-social issues also emerge. It's hence important that we focus a bit on labor-oriented job creation, which is possible only with a huge infrastructure spend. And India, as we know, given its demographics, is a very large consumer economy waiting to grow. And it is in the interest of the whole world, not just India, interest of whole world, that India succeeds and has lot of purchasing power in the hands of the lower middle class and the poor as well. So I want to be optimistic, but I think we should be guarded that we shouldn't end up with a K-shaped kind of a recovery.
Okay. Now let me focus on another aspect, which is about the spends that corporates are making on technology. The digital transformation and this move to a, if I call it, digital economy has led to more and more investments coming into technology. What is your view in terms of where do you think this is headed?
I think it's a welcome investment because we are actually catching up with the rest of the world. So some of these investments are what should have happened over the last 20 years. I think we are catching up with the rest of the world. So it's a welcome sign in that sense. And important in my view are two things, Dr. Batra. One is to leverage this technology or digitalization focus which we are seeing now. India should quickly embrace 5G. It's very, very important. We are already late by at least 3 years in my view, or if not 3, at least 2 years in my view. And I'm a strong believer that 5G will have the ability of adding at least $500 billion to the economy. The second is, as far as the manufacturing and services sector is concerned, the manufacturing sector, the capacity utilization even before the pandemic actually shrunk from about 75% to 70%. And now post-pandemic, it's hovering at around 60 to 65. And unless we see consumption-led demand, people will not invest in capacity creation. And it's very important that we are able to generate consumption. Consumption would mean more money in the hands of the lower middle class and the poor. Only then we will see the investment cycle coming up. So let's wait and see. Government has brought in several initiatives, including the production-linked incentive schemes. They have done their best in terms of ensuring liquidity in the system. So let's hope for the best.
Absolutely. You know, it's a very oxymoronish kind of an environment. At one end, there is this IPOs coming out. The valuations are very aggressive, steep. And on the other side is this market impacted by inflationary prices, by a low sentiment, certain sectors not doing well. So, do you see a disconnect in both these?
There is certainly a disconnect, Dr. Batra, but I think then we need to analyze these two independently. For me, the interest in the stock market is, in a sense, a positive sign, which is largely happening because of the huge liquidity in the system and the fact that the deposit rates are low and investments in real estate is also low. Today, as we know, almost about 45% of daily trades are happening from the retail investors. I see it positive because an expanded retail base in equity market is good when we have new companies coming up for listing, and there'll be more retail investors. Once people have tasted equity market, they would like to explore it more, and the savings which otherwise would have been in unproductive assets like gold or in land, those would actually come into productive use, and the multiplier effect will happen in the economy. SEBI is doing its best to ensure good governance practices so that we don't come across any large-scale corporate failures, which is very important to ensure, because few failures and retail investors will vanish away and it can be extremely harmful. In the next 10 years, if we can ensure serious cause for concern, but one way to look at it is from the manufacturer of goods point of view, the prices are going to get back, their revenues would increase. So for the short run, it is fine. But in the long run, it's important we curtail inflation. Otherwise, the risk of interest rates going up and projects becoming unviable is pretty high. So I think both are quite independent and have to be dealt with separately.
Okay. Now let me ask you another question which is on my mind. How would you compare and predict the pace of recovery against global markets? Of course, India has its unique strengths. Will it be a straight V-shaped recovery, or some analysts are saying it will be a K-shaped recovery, which means in certain sectors it will recover and certain sectors will continue to not do well? What is your sense, since you interact with a large number of corporates? What's your sense?
Dr. Batra, I have a strong wish that it should be a V-shaped recovery. It's a very strong personal wish. But as I mentioned a little while ago, there is a reasonably high probability of a K-shaped recovery, where some sectors and some section of the population are unlikely to see a recovery in the immediate foreseeable future. So that's something we need to be very guarded. And I hope there is adequate policy level thinking and action happening at the government to ensure that we don't go to a K-shaped situation. My fear about K-shaped recovery, Dr. Batra, which I shared earlier, and since I strongly believe, I would like to reiterate again, is that when you do a K-shaped recovery, the inequality gap becomes very, very high, and which is not a healthy situation, because inequality always leads to anti-social activities. So we need to, and the cost of law and order, etc., will change significantly. So personally, I wish we don't end up with a K-shaped situation.
Okay, now let's talk about your market. SIFI has largely been an MSME focused company, which is a very large play, and it can add, MSME fortunes being good means that the country is doing well, that the GDP is doing well. Now, but MSME has been impacted in the last 17 months. Let's be very real about it. How has that impacted you or translated into impact on you?
Okay. So Dr. Batra, as far as SIFI is concerned, the customer segments are the large enterprises and the higher end of the MSME segment. The large enterprises, while they were personally not so impacted, but given the fact that they are in turn dependent on the SME segment, there's an indirect impact which certainly
Absolutely
is there. So there is an impact. I don't think we can deny the same. What we are seeing is very active engagement with the MSMEs now. And one good thing about MSMEs, Dr. Batra, between the 90s when I started my career to now is most of these MSMEs are now in the hands of second generation, third generation, fairly well exposed, well educated people who have traveled wide, or with new entrepreneurs who have good experience in that industry. I'm seeing these entrepreneurs are now fairly digital savvy, and they're willing to look at transformation of their own businesses by embracing technology. So they've still not yet started spending money because they're waiting for signals of recovery. But I think they're putting a good amount of time and effort to get their plans on the board ready so that they can invest once they start seeing the uptick. They wouldn't obviously like to invest ahead of a potential uptick. So that's how I'm seeing the MSME segment behavioral pattern towards IT spends.
Okay. Now, as I said, the role of a CFO has been changing over the last few years. And you yourself talked that the CFO has a detailed view of all departments and hence the complete business. If I ask you to kind of do crystal ball raising, how do you see the role of a new age CFO will be 3 to 5 years from now? I know these days we tend to think of weeks, months, we don't think that ahead. But since I have you, I'd like to know from you your view on where is the role of CFO headed?
It's a tough question, Dr. Batra, as you said, but I will hazard a guess. And probably I could take a bit of flack for this as well. My view, tomorrow, CFOs will be those who will have stronger capabilities of understanding client businesses, not our business, client businesses, where their businesses are undertaking digital transformation, and build our finance function, our risk management function, our pricing models to meet the client business needs. I see that as a major change. Additionally, in a digitalized finance function, and which is part of a digitalized organization, the CFO of the organization will also be a data architect. The repository of companies' financial data will be with the CFO's organization, and he must be in a position to transpose the company's business models into a digital universe. And I always keep saying this with reference to financial or business information. In today's context, nobody is interested about historical information. What happened for the year ended March 21? That's history. Nobody is interested. Everybody, whether it is within the organization, your peers, heading marketing function, production function, sales, whatever function, or the external people, all of them are looking at what I call as predictive information. So as a CFO organization, it's very important to build that capabilities where you give lead indicators of the business opportunities, risk factors, so that all of those can be managed. And that's a very unique skill set which can be built over a period of time. And lastly, I would also believe that unlike many organizations, I'm not making a comment, but my experience is many organizations, finance functions are little closed functions. You try to keep the data to yourself. You try to hold it yourself. but I think it will change, where you need to enable a total openness and collaboration within the entire company for the information. So keeping that information guarded will actually be a negative, because many people think keeping organization within finance is a very strong point. I don't subscribe to that. It's important that all the key stakeholders in the organization should know the same. So in a nutshell, as a single liner, CFO should typically be a leader with a digital vision and skills to manage with digital tools. That's my thoughts on the future CFO.
My last question before I let you go. As I said, there are billion-dollar valuations being actualized on the stock market. And I've already asked you about a disconnect. But in some way, it is a representative of the interest in the consumer tech economy, of the technology-based future. If you had to make 2-3 predictions about the future of technology impacting business, what would those be?
I would say that in the short term, it would be the services sector. The services across education, medicine, or restaurants would be the immediate gainers. But in immediate long-term future, most of the manufacturing companies would change their business models in terms of delivery models, whether including manufacturing models. We have things like 3D printing, etc., which are all now a reality. 3D printing has now become like very well established technology. So I see in a long term, all of them will also gain. So its initial would be largely services sector, but it will definitely be followed by the rest of the sectors as well. And on a personal note, Dr. Batra, I would like to see good educated talent and talent who have leadership managerial skills actually look at agriculture as well. And if this talent can actually get back to agriculture and enable more technology use in agriculture, I think the dream of a $10 trillion economy will be soon seen. So I am actually looking at a scenario where we are able to bring in that good talent into the agriculture sector. I am doing a little bit of effort in encouraging people to think in those lines because the ability to improve productivity in that sector is so huge that the gains are very high.
That was Mr. MP Vijay Kumar talking to BW Business World and BW CFO World. Mr. MP Vijay Kumar, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and you rightly outlined the future that awaits us. Again, no one knows the future, but it is based on the trends that we see today, which may manifest themselves in bigger ways. So thank you for talking to BW Business World and BW CFO World. We wish you luck in your endeavor to contribute to nation building through your personal and professional initiatives. And I'm sure we'll be happy to have a conversation with you soon again on technology, on the changing nature of future of work, on how demand economy is set to rise, and how consumer tech is changing the way we live our lives. So thank you for talking to us. Because of your vantage position at SIFI, you do see what's happening in the business world and in the technology world. And I'm sure watching your interview and reading your interview, our viewers and readers would be more informed about the future. Thank you, Mr. MP Vijay Kumar. It's been a pleasure speaking to you on behalf of BW Business World and BW CFO World. We wish you luck and look forward to more conversations with you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Batra. It was a pleasure interacting with you, and I should personally acknowledge the quality of questions were fairly probing and insightful. So thank you for this opportunity to me and for my organization. Thank you.
The pleasure is all mine, and we'll do more conversations. Thank you so much.